Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. Tansei. This is the customary greeting of the First Nation peoples who traditionally lived in the Edmonton area. The Alberta Teachers Association would like to acknowledge that we are presenting today from within the boundaries of Treaty 6, which was first signed at Fort Carlton, Saskatchewan in 1876. Treaty 6 is a vast area covering large portions of central Alberta and Saskatchewan and encompasses the reserve lands of 18 First Nations bands. Along with the Plains Cree First Nations, Treaty 6 also includes the traditional territories of the Nakota, Saulteaux, and Dene-Sulene First Nation. I'd like to give a picture so you can see who is on the other side of the screen. Again, thank you so much for joining us for the second part of this webinar. But I'm hoping we can really build a discussion today about tools and techniques for the classroom, so that I'm hoping you walk away with some food for thought about alterations that you can make to your classroom or different activities that you can use. And so if you do have your participant guide, it should be page 31. These are tips for teachers to use in their classrooms. I'll just give you some information here. The first one talks about teaching history accurately and critically. So we want to make sure that we are providing accurate portrayals of historical events. And these are actually quite hard to find, especially many of these things have happened a long time ago. So when we are bringing in resources to the classroom, it's important that we find resources with multiple perspectives, but also perspectives of those that were involved in that history. One way for you to teach history accurately is to invite elders to present oral histories to your classrooms. Just to be cautious of history books and stories that characterize conflicts between settlers and First Nations as Indian massacres or settlers' victories as conquests. These accounts can color the way descendants of both sides feel about each other and provide a one-sided perspective on what happened. Another tip for teachers is to understand the impact that history has had on your students. Be aware of the biases in looking only at one perspective, and trying to understand how this history has affected the students in your class. By having an open policy with my students, I have many students come and talk to me, and after discussing residential schools with my grade 7 social studies class, a student came up and let me know that his father had been in a residential school. And so just being aware of how that impacts him and how discussing that may bring up some feelings for him, and just making sure that he knows that we are teaching accurately, and that I am happy to talk to him about that. And sometimes the students will want to talk, and sometimes they won't, and respecting that as well. It's important for us to be sensitive to cultural differences relating to time, to learn as much as possible as you can about local culture, customs, and protocols. By bringing in community members and community information, you can build those connections with your students and also the community. And the last one there is to select appropriate resources. I'm going to be sharing with you about the Alberta Teachers Association Library later on in this presentation, and there's a wealth of knowledge on that website for you to check out, and so I'm excited to share that with you. There are some more tips and suggestions for teachers on page 37 in your participant guide if you do want to browse through there. I'm going to be starting off our discussion with 2 questions here. These are talking points, so like I said, I am encouraging you to be brave and use your microphone. So looking at the tips for teachers on page 31 of our participant guide, are there one of these tips that you already use in your classroom? Or another question for you to think about is, which of these tips can you see yourself using in the classroom? And if you could provide examples, I think that really helps us with our discussion.
One thing I think that we struggled with is as not being from our community, is trying to find people and connect with the local Aboriginal culture. And one thing that's been really, I mean, it's been kind of a random, I guess, is that in the other middle school, we hired a gentleman who comes from Onion Lake, and he's been huge in connecting us with aunts and uncles and elders and people that had we not had a connection in, would have been, I think, difficult for us. But once we found that one person that's kind of got us and into the community and help us learn about the culture and the protocols and the customs, then that's opened us up to a whole bunch more people and a whole bunch more learning. And so that's been awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing, and being the first one, you get a gold star for braving the microphone. Not all communities have a friendship center, so it can be difficult to make those connections, but oftentimes finding a family member for a student in the school, or finding, like you were able to find someone who was able to make those connections, that can be really meaningful for a school community. Tyler made a really good point also in the chat window about text being fairly one-sided and not showing the multiple perspectives. That's a great point as well.
Yeah, I'll just speak up from the consortia perspective. Regarding contacting and being able to find elders and knowledge keepers that are available to come into school classrooms is a real challenge. But I know throughout the province, and I know we're across the province here today, but there is a local consortia in your area that is more than willing to help you assist finding these people. So there's the ARPDC, there's the Southern Alberta Consortia out of Lethbridge, down in Treaty 7 area, and then Calgary. I know the Calgary Regional Consortia has quite an extensive, almost elder on call kind of roster. You could check with them. And I know that Red Deer, the CARC, Central Alberta, and ourselves, Learning Network in the east, and certainly Edmonton Consortia, and up in the Peace River country, the Northern Consortia. We all have those contacts, and we've all had some success with assisting schools and jurisdictions to contact some knowledge keepers. So I would keep in mind giving your regional consortia a call, and we can help you out as best we can with those kind of contacts.
I just wanted to say that I think one of the things I've had some difficulty with is just learning as much as I can about their culture and customs, protocols. And once you find the people, the one person that can help you with that, learning as much as you can has really been beneficial for my my work with that population of kids.
Thank you so much for sharing, and that's kind of where my journey, and that's what I shared last week as well. Once I started to get more professional development and become more involved, I became a better teacher as I was able to share history more accurately and provide more of an understanding of the multiple perspectives instead of just the settler perspective. Natalie, you brought up a really great example about the blanket exercise. That's a wonderful professional development opportunity that the Alberta Teachers Association does provide as well. So if your staff is looking for some professional development, the Walking Together consultants do provide a blanket exercise to schools. And I participated in one in the summer, and it's a very powerful and very meaningful opportunity for teachers to learn about the history of Canada and in an Alberta context, which I think is important for our students as well. Nancy has just provided a link. If your school is interested in a blanket exercise, she's put the email address down there for you. I just want to thank everyone for braving the microphone. I'm glad we got our first few shares out of the way, so hopefully this is going to be a meaningful PD for you to have that discussion with everyone here today. So thank you so much for doing that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the cultural communication. Language can be used in a variety of ways. How we speak, including tone, pitch, and speed, can affect the meaning even when the words are the same. Also, nonverbal behavior in terms of cultural communication is important. They do convey specific and subtle meanings that can be read accurately or misinterpreted. One comment here is, be aware that when you listen to others, you interpret what he or she is saying and doing according to your own culture. So it's important for us to recognize that our own cultural assumptions may affect the process, and you may misjudge or misunderstand the message. So I think that's important for us as teachers, but also important for us to understand, because sometimes we may be saying or doing something and our students are misinterpreting or misunderstanding because of their cultural understanding. And so being just very clear, and sometimes students will ask, well, what do you mean by that? Or can you explain it a different way? And so just making sure that we are being very explicit when we are discussing history and being accurate is important. This is just a quote for us to have another talking point about. Native youth raised in the traditional way are not rewarded for asking questions or verbally analyzing situations. Rather, these children are expected to learn through careful observation, listening, and patience. So my question up for discussion is, what teaching strategies are compatible with this generalization? So what types of things are you doing in your classroom, or can you see yourself doing in your classroom that are compatible with this statement? So I'll open up the floor again. If you want to share, please feel free to raise your hand, or if you don't have a microphone, to add your ideas down in the chat window. Thanks, Tyler, for your comment. Absolutely, being able to provide a demonstration for students to watch and observe is great for all students. Ben, go ahead. Thanks for raising your hand.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, some courses require a lot of verbalization of situations. I teach a salesmanship course, and it requires people to role play and think and speak rather quickly. And some techniques I use include setting the scene, giving people some opportunity to practice ahead of time, so that when they are called upon, they can deliver. Because when they have work experience, you will not always get that prep time. So it's about encouraging a person to challenge themselves a little bit more, so that they could fit better into the working environment. And I think this also sometimes goes for a lot of our students who may be introverts as well. So it's about perhaps prepping them a little bit more so that they are ready for when you have to ask questions, answer questions, and analyze things verbally. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Ben. Those are really great examples, and I think for many students to have that opportunity ahead of time to set the stage before they have to talk about it is a really great example. Some other people were talking about sharing circles as well, holistic teaching. So we are going to be talking about sharing circles in a little bit as well, but some really great conversation happening in the chat window. Having teachers model, so for students to be able to see something done first by observing, thinking about classes like mathematics and science, those can be really important opportunities for students to watch carefully before something is done. Language arts, having those reading buddies or having a read aloud where a teacher goes through and kind of talks about what they're thinking as they're reading through something can be really important for students to see how we think as adults as well. So thank you for everyone for your comments on this section. I do have another question here for you. This one is in reference to nonverbal behavior. In traditional First Nations, Métis, and Inuit cultures, arguing, asking questions, contradicting, interrupting, and speaking for others are considered disrespectful ways of interacting. Silence is an appropriate way to introduce an activity or get ready to do something. And so what are the classroom implications when thinking about this statement? And Dan, I know your statement you put with the last question that was up, but it also actually really works well for this statement. For students to be able to say pass in the sharing circle and to not have to share and to be silent and just observe, I think is important for us to allow students to know that they don't always have to speak, they can pass. Tyler, I like your comment about starting with a mindful moment, just to allow students that time to get prepared before an activity. And also the comments below about just because students are silent, it doesn't mean that they are disinterested or that they aren't thinking. And so for teachers to understand that, and wait time is, I think, one of the toughest things that I struggle with, is allowing students that time before I start calling on students who have their hands up, but to allow for other students to process as well. Not all students process very quickly, so it's important for us to give students time to think before we go through answers. Thanks, Derek, for your comment. I think it's the relationship piece is so important, and so I agree with you. Finding that time to check in with students is so important. When our class sizes tend to get bigger and bigger, it's hard to find that time, but it is really special for all of our students to have that time with us. So thank you. Merle has a comment here that he's typing. While we're waiting for that, if you want to pull up your participant guide, if you've got it, and head to page 20, then once we hear from Merle, we'll be able to move on. Sorry, Merle, I didn't mean to discourage you from typing. Absolutely. The next slide here has a medicine wheel. So this comes from your participant guide on page 20. This is an ancient symbol used by the peoples of North and South America. There are many different ways that this basic concept is expressed. It can be the four grandfathers, the four winds, the four cardinal directions, and many other relationships that can be expressed in sets of four. Just like a mirror can be used to see things not normally visible, the medicine wheel can be used to help us see or understand things we can't quite see or understand because they are ideas and not necessarily physical objects. It teaches us that the four symbolic races are all part of the same human family, all are brothers and sisters living on the same Mother Earth. It teaches us that the four branches, each so distinctive and powerful, are all part of the physical world and must be respected equally for their gift of life. There's the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual, and each must be equally developed in a healthy and well-balanced individual through the development and use of volition. There are many ways to incorporate the idea of the sacred circle, the medicine wheel in your classroom. On page 40 of the participant guide, there are some suggestions about sharing circles for the classroom. A sharing circle is a very meaningful classroom activity. If you have used one before, maybe just raise your hand so we can see if anyone here is familiar with the sharing circle. Oral tradition provides the opportunity to share personal and meaningful stories and ideas, and it models a way to identify key teaching or ideas related to the experiences of the group. And I think, Derek, that was your hand that was up. So thank you for sharing. So your students can participate in a talking circle, learn to listen and respect the views of others. It's a really great activity for students to participate in. It's important that it's done respectfully. There's only one person that speaks at a time. The talking stick goes according to the directions of the sun, making sure that if participants want to pass, they don't have to speak. They can just say pass, and there are no repercussions for that. But students can really listen to their peers and listen to the multiple perspectives in a classroom, which I think is really important. Another suggestion from page 40 is for students to create a personal wheel with goals in the four aspects of self-reflecting on one's qualities, gifts, and goals for the future. And so if you're in a calm situation in the high school or in a homeroom where you want to talk about individuality in students, for them to be able to create their own personal wheel could be a meaningful activity as well. And some of you brought up storytelling earlier. You could have students sit in the circle to create a story together by following a pattern. So those are just some that I wanted to point out. Is there anyone who wants to share how they have used this? I think, Derek, you were the only one to raise your hand. But maybe some of you are starting to get some ideas of how you could use a talking circle or a sharing circle in the classroom setting. Go ahead, Derek, thanks.
One thing that we have done is something called a morning meeting, and for the life of me, I can't remember the author at the moment. It's a big red book anyway. And one of the things that we've done there is we kind of start with a greeting where everybody greets someone else. So everybody is identified by name by someone else as a handshake or a high five or something that they feel comfortable with. And then there's a sharing circle, usually a two-part, one where there could be just general sharing where it goes around what's going on, what happened on the weekend, what happened last night, what's any funny stories, anything interesting. And then maybe a second part is kind of a centering to an activity where there's like a question about what we're going to be talking about, and then a chance to go around and kind of set out any knowledge that we have ahead of time or any questions or any connections that we have to that, and then move forward from there. It could also be a random question about, anything, something very simple, something very complex and deep. But the circle, we have found, offers like an awesome non-judgmental space for people to share their opinions and listen to others.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That sounds like a really wonderful classroom activity, one that I might borrow myself. So thank you so much for sharing. Natalie, you also have a weekly meeting and using that talking stick to determine the speaker. So thank you for sharing. I think having students share, and I like the idea of students all sharing together rather than just coming up and sharing with you as the teacher. It builds that sense of community amongst your students. And so for students to connect with the sharing circle and to start to see their culture in the classroom can be very meaningful for students who have Aboriginal heritage. So that's really great. Thank you. I'll let Derek and Adam type before I move on. Thanks for sharing that, Adam. That was another suggestion, or there's a similar suggestion on page 40, having that goodwill chain where students can share positive messages with the class is really great. So thank you for sharing that idea as well. On page 34 in your participant guide, there are tips for talking with Aboriginal parents and caregivers of Aboriginal students. There are some really wonderful suggestions that many schools I have visited have really enjoyed being able to look through this list, and it really helps them develop a plan. What I have done before is have teachers go through and star besides the tips, things they've done already. I don't think you want to start writing on your laptop, but maybe to just make a mental note of which one of these tips are you using already, and then think about which tips you could see yourself using. And so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read through that. Again, it's on page 34. And so just think about, are there tips that you're currently using? Have they been successful in building those positive relationships? So feel free. I'd love for you to join us on the microphone if possible. So I'll give you a couple minutes to read through that, and then hopefully we can, oh, sorry, thanks, Lorraine, page 39 instead of page 34. So page 39, and I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then hopefully we can have a discussion. So feel free to write your answers on the wall as a graffiti post. If one or two of you are brave enough for the microphone, we'd love to hear things you've done in your school, and we can also continue the chat in the chat window.
Hi, so I just wrote a paper for my master's, and actually I wrote on parent participating in the school. And one of the key things they talked about was meeting with parents meeting with the teachers in a safe place. So they talked about their meeting in like community halls for parent-teacher interviews instead of at the school, because a lot of parents have had things happen in their life within the school situations that make them uncomfortable with going in the school. And then also it talked about providing PDs for parents on how they can help their students within the schools. So this could be helping them with reading to young children. It could be talking to them about the school rules and regulations so that they understand the expectations of the school. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thanks, Lorraine. Congratulations on your master's work. That's super exciting. I think the example of having parent-teacher interviews in community halls is something that perhaps schools need to rethink. That's a wonderful suggestion. For many parents, through intergenerational trauma, coming to the school is not possible. And so reframing those relationships, if we can't have those safe spaces be in the school, where else in the community can we provide safe spaces for families. So thank you for that wonderful suggestion. Is there anybody else who wants to come on the microphone and feel free to write down any of your answers to these questions in the chat window. There is the comment about the dressing casually. Typically, in my experience, parent-teacher interviews are quite formal and teachers are dressed up. Not fancy, but teachers do dress up. And so perhaps having those dressed casually is a really good suggestion as well to make it seem more of an informal rather than a formal meeting. Schools that have liaison workers, it sounds like a really great experience for your teachers and for the families at your school. That would be really great for all schools to have as well. Hi, Merle. That's a really great point. Thank you for sharing. When teachers do take the time to get to know the community by participating in school and also community events, that can build really powerful relationships between students, teachers, and families. So thank you for your suggestion. This next slide has a few comments or a few resources here. Education is Our Buffalo is one of the resources that Dan emailed out. It's a wonderful resource whether you're just looking for more information. It also talks about tips for teachers as well, where education is going in Alberta, looking at misconceptions about Aboriginal people and how to incorporate Aboriginal teaching into today's classroom. So while I don't have time to go through all of these things today, I wanted to point out 3 really great slides for you to have a look at. And so those are 3 sections for you to make note of. I would love for you all to read through the entire booklet, but I know that we are all very busy people and that might not be possible. So I just wanted to highlight a few sections here for you. As well, at the back of your participant guide, I think it's page 47, but I'm not sure now that Lorraine pointed out that it wasn't the same as the slides. Oh, it looks like page 47 on my guide. So I think 47 is right. There are a lot of links for you to access if you are looking for information. The first link that shows up is a Learn Alberta website. So if you do have questions about how to bring an elder or how to invite an elder into your classroom, or similar questions, there's a step-by-step guide to provide some more information. I think one thing I was lucky enough at summer conference to listen to Charlene Barehead speak, and one of the things she said is, we're so afraid to be disrespectful, but then we don't act. And so by having these resources to help us show us the most respectful and most appropriate way to make those connections, hopefully we can get over that fear and make meaningful connections for our students and meaningful opportunities in the classroom for all of our students. And so it's a great resource section. As well, the ATA library is a wonderful resource for teachers in Alberta. You can take out books. It's free. They mail them to you, and then you mail them back at their cost, which is wonderful. For us, I've been able to take out many books, and it's just a really great resource. They also have many online links, and so if you are looking for resources for your classroom to incorporate more Aboriginal history, or you're looking for more information about how to incorporate the teaching of Aboriginal teaching into your classroom, there are lots of links right there online for you, so you don't have to go do a Google search and get 1,000 different resources. Nancy shared that you can download full text articles from the, I don't know, it's eBosco's host site, right from the ATA library. So if you are looking for articles, that is another way for you to access them. So it's a really great resource, and many teachers in Alberta don't know about it. So I'm hoping to spread the word. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues. that you can access the ATA library, and there are many links on there that will help you if you're looking for more information. I'm almost out of time here. Oh, Derek added here, there's a peer mentorship program that pairs you with a mentor in your area to help with questions. That's awesome. And so if you are looking for that, and I think the link for that website is on the resources section. So thank you, Derek, for sharing that for teachers. So if you are looking for a mentor to get paired up with, that would be a great place to go. What I would like to do before closing today is the leaf before leaving. I would typically like to have leaves to give out to people and have them write an answer to one of these questions and keep it somewhere where they're going to look at it. No, don't just tuck it away in a notebook or put it in a desk. I'd like to keep it out and visible so teachers are reminded of a commitment that they're making for all of their students. So please choose one of these questions. I'd love for one more person to get on the mic and share with us, or if you want to share in the chat window, that would be wonderful. Thank you to everyone who is sharing with us. I really appreciate reading your comments. And so I want to be respectful of your time and understand that some of you might have to run. I can be here for a couple of minutes to answer questions. I will put my email address up here for you, so if you do have questions, feel free to send me an email. And I just want to thank you again so much for your participation today. I hope we gave you some food for thought, and I appreciate the stories that you shared and the examples. And I look forward to maybe seeing you again in another webinar. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.